Hey guys, Quiff the Lazy Geek here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a new electronic focuser on the market that comes from none other than QHY from QHY CCD fame. So if you're new to astrophotography, you may or may not have used QHY products, but they were one of the OG budget camera makers for astrophotography. And the focuser that we are going to be looking at today is the Q-Focuser from QHY CCD. Now, this is not something that I was expecting. QHY reached out to me out of the blue for me to test out this focuser. This focuser is on loan. I will test it and I will have to return it to QHY once I am done. I am not getting any money out of this. And in fact, I will pay the shipping back. So I'm losing money. But it's fine because thanks to my Patreon supporters, channel members, and all of my viewers, I'm able to keep the channel going. So thank you so much for your support. Anyway, let's go back to this focuser and look at it and also look in details as to what makes it special or at least different from other autofocusing solutions or focuser solutions like the very reputable ZW EAF. And the answer to that question becomes immediately apparent as I remove the focuser from the box. That thing is tiny, absolutely tiny. I think it's around 210 grams. So it feels heavy in hand in comparison to the volume it occupies, but it's actually much smaller than the ZW-EAF. And like when I compare them side by side, yeah, the size difference is very obvious. So that's a really cool little trick there that we have. And in terms of pricing as well, from what I've seen, the pricing of this particular version of the focuser is around $200 bare bones, which is the same as the ZW-EAF here. This focuser will come in two versions. One is going to be the standard version, which is what I asked for because I feel this is the one that most of my viewers, most of you guys will be interested in as the cheaper version. And there is also going to be a high precision version that does two things. The standard version is supposed to have some backlash, probably similar order as the EAF, although I haven't tested yet, so we'll test that together later. While the high precision version apparently has zero backlash, and it also has a knob here at the back to allow you to manually move the focuser so that even when this focuser is not powered, you're able to adjust the focus of your optics manually, which is a feature that I really, really like, and I think it's very important to have. So if that's something that's important to have for you as well, not just the standard version, but the high precision version might be interesting to you. Obviously, I will put links down in the description to the focuser and its various versions, so you can have a look. Now, what else comes in the box? We get a USB cable, and this is a USB-C cable because the plug at the back of the focuser here is actually a USB-C plug, which is like, welcome to the 21st century. Nowadays, more and more cables are USB-C. It becomes easier and easier to procure them, and maybe even easier than other types of cables. And one of the other things that you may notice with this focuser is, in addition to the USB port and also a temperature sensor port, which are fairly classic in this type of focuser, we have a DC 12-volt port, which might be an immediate disappointment for a lot of people, but do not be disappointed because I am told that this focuser will work perfectly fine with just USB connected, just like the EAF will. The 12-volt input here is only here in case you're going to be using this with a very heavy imaging train and you need the focuser to have an additional punch to actually move the equipment back and forth with the focusing tube, which is a great option to have. One small disadvantage of the system, and I think it comes with having such a small focuser, is that you actually need a conversion cable between the very small 12-volt plug here and a proper 2.1 millimeter. I don't remember the exact size of normal DC plugs that we use for astrophotography, but that converter is available in the box. So in the box, we had the focuser, the USB-C cable, the DC 12-volt adapter, and we also have included in the standard version the temperature sensor. That's also really neat. It means that for the same price as the EAF, you not only get the focuser, but also the temperature sensor. Now, I haven't actually never used temperature sensor for adapting the focus for astrophotography. I rely on I have N.I.N.A basically react to the HFR changing throughout the night. So if the imaging software realizes throughout the night that because of changing temperatures, the focus point has changed and therefore the stars are appearing bigger, it will trigger an autofocus run. But you can actually go without those autofocus runs if you have a temperature probe by basically computing how much your equipment is sensitive to temperature changes. And once you know that, you can actually program imaging software like N.I.N.A to slowly move the focus, maybe in between exposures, based on the current temperature that is being measured by this kind of probe. So that avoids doing even additional autofocus runs like I do personally. And that might be something that I will look in the future, but to me, it's like almost not lazy enough. I mean, I think it is lazy, but only after a lot of initial work to set it up. So I do not know whether I'll use that, but it's a super cool option to have. We also get hex wrenches, as we would expect, and 4 different couplers so that you can connect the focuser to a telescope. So up to now, it's very standard and it's very similar to what we get with the EAF, with the addition of the temperature sensor. Where things get a little bit different is in terms of the mounting solution. We get it in 2 parts. We get like a ton of screws. We get some weird little plates in this bag. And we get a longer plate without any specific holes in here, like just like long-ish areas, so we can adjust the mounting to pretty much any telescope. And QHY markets that as an advantage over a solution like a mounting plate like we have here, which has only a set amount of distances that it can cover. And I think it's a good way for QHY to play catch up, because by now most telescope manufacturers have looked at the EAF. They know the EAF is kind of a de facto standard. It's used by a lot of people, so they make sure that they have instructions for the telescopes so it will work with the EAF and its mounting plates. Some makers, they don't really care. I think Takahashi is a maker that doesn't care, for instance. And so QHY took a look at that and decided, like, okay, if they want to be compatible with as many telescopes as possible, they'll have to go through a system like this. So I'll be assembling this and seeing whether it can work well with my own telescope. The telescope that we will be using today to assemble and put the focuser on is my trusty ASCAR V refractor. It's a really excellent little telescope. I did a review of that a while back. I'll put a link up above if I remember and down in the description if you want to have a look. But anyway, the focuser of the telescope is super smooth. So I love to use it with focusers, and that's what we'll be doing today. To note that refracting telescopes and a lot of other telescope types with their default dual speed focusers, they have one side of the focuser that has a dual speed, like this side, and then we have the rough adjustment only on the opposite side. And the standard version of the focuser, like the one that I have, is made for the for this side, for the rough adjustment only, whereas the high precision one is made to actually fit in here on the low speed or the high precision adjustments of the focuser. Anyway, there's a lot of mounting hardware. I'll need to figure it out to mount it to my telescope. This is all of the mounting hardware that comes with the focuser. It's a lot, but there are some good instructions online on the QHY site, so I'll be following those. And I just installed it, and the installation itself was pretty straightforward. So this is how it looks like. We have 2 screws here that are connected to like some plates that are connected on the long plate, and those go directly inside the telescope screw holes that we have available on the focuser level. This long plate is connected by those 2 screws here, all of the screws provided, by the way, to a smaller plate here that is connected directly to the focuser via a little screw. You can see the head here, 2 little screws. You can see the head here. And it's like much simpler than I expected. It's very stable, very solid. So that's kind of like good, especially since this is like a random telescope that I had on hand. The only thing that annoyed me was that the hex wrenches provided fit those screws here, and they fit the screws that connect the focuser to the smaller plate here, but they did not fit the screws here and there, so I had to fetch my own wrenches for that. Those, FYI, are 3 millimeters. So once I had my 3 millimeter wrench, I was able to secure those on. So that's a bit weird that we get like the wrenches for these types there, but not this one. But otherwise, nothing of note. It's working pretty well, and if you have just like a few minutes, you'll wrap your head around it and install it without any issue. And concerning software support, so we can actually use the focuser with the computer because it's planned to have a remote control, so you can actually use it like kind of manually, but it's not released yet. So right now, the only way to really control it is via the USB-C port. The instructions on the QHY website are pretty clear. So it's about installing ASCOM, which is the platform that's going to be used for the supporting the focuser drivers in capture software like N.I.N.A. And once you have installed ASCOM, you can install the ASCOM driver provided by QHY and the software, imaging software you're going to use, for example, N.I.N.A. And also you want to install the Windows driver for the camera so that when you plug it in as a USB device, it's going to be recognized by Windows, so it can then be used by ASCOM. That last step might be the most delicate because you get a RAR file, which is not supported natively by Windows. You need to install third-party unzipping software like 7-zip, which is free to unzip that. And once it's unzipped, you want to use the version that works for your computer, which for most computers these days is x64. And then you can use this to install the driver. And it's only after you've done those steps that you want to first plug in the focuser to your computer. Otherwise, you could run into some issues. Once you've done all of this setup and the focuser is plugged into your computer, in your imaging software like N.I.N.A, you can go to the focuser tab, select Q-Focuser ASCOM there, and you can do the initial setup via the settings icon here. This opens up this screen here, which for me was in Chinese by default. To change it to English, you use the top right pull down here. And then otherwise, you have the COM port that you can set here. If it is empty, you should try to disconnect and reconnect the focuser. Or you can click on the auto button to try to find it. And once you've selected the COM port and pressed OK, it should be available in N.I.N.A. There's some cool features that are available in here. We have, in particular, the keep force here, which allows the motor to kind of stay active, which heats up the focuser, which can be used for cold weather climates. And you also have the ability to use or not the external temperature sensor. For me, I haven't connected it to the focuser, so I have that unchecked. Once that's ready, in N.I.N.A, I can simply connect the focuser and we are good to go. And so how does this tiny focuser perform in real life? So I took my refractor telescope, I pointed it towards Vega for now because I'm like too lazy to think about anything more. And I basically massaged the parameters of the focuser in N.I.N.A until I got something that worked really well for this system. So now you can see my screen. This is the type of focus curve that this thing is repeatedly giving me. So no issues whatsoever in terms of the autofocusing curves. This is the type of image that I get. I have validated with a Bahtinov mask as well. And so I feel like this is working perfectly well. The settings I have in N.I.N.A are basically the default autofocus settings, except my exposure length is 1 second. And then there's, of course, the focuser backlash. And there is some, because remember, I'm using the standard version and not the high precision version. And also we have the autofocus step size. So there's like several things to keep in mind. You have the focuser step size, and then you have the autofocus process step size, which is in units of focuser step size. So for me, we can look at the parameters for my autofocus on the PC, and you can see that I have set my autofocus step size to 300 focuser steps. And so if I go back to my autofocus curve, the distance between each of those points here is 300 focuser steps. And that's indicates to me that the focuser has extremely fine steps. So the smallest unit that it looks at is very, very tiny, very, very fine. Because as I remember it, when I was using my EAF to obtain a very similar curve, I think my autofocus step size was around 30. So we have a ratio, like let's say the step size of the focuser, the QHY focuser, seems to be roughly 10 times finer than that of the ZW-EAF. And the amount of backlash compared to the autofocus step size seems to be similar. And you can see that I put the backlash as an overshoot backlash with a number of 1500 steps, or in autofocus steps, that's just 5 autofocus steps. And this is roughly what I typically use with my EAF as well. So very similar. And again, this is the standard version, and both of those focusers are available at the same price. And I'd like to reiterate how tiny that thing is. I mean, look at it. It's really, really tiny. And that's really fun. So how well does this little focuser work? It actually works really, really well. I almost want to get myself the high precision version now. One other thing that I noticed, by the way, something stupid, but always nice, the USB-C cable is super supple, super flexible, and it feels like super high quality, which is just something I noticed I wanted to mention. So with that in mind, if you're looking for a focuser, is this the focuser that you should buy? Well, it's really up to you. It's working very well. I don't think there's any issues with this focuser. To me, it's like basically a ZW-EAF, but smaller size and blue. You also have the high precision version, which I really now want to maybe get and test, which would let you move the focuser manually. That's a huge advantage, and that's something that I personally think would make it superior to the ZW-EAF. It also comes in either model with the temperature probe. So if you're scientific minded and you want to spend the work to estimate how quickly your system goes out of focus with temperature, so you're basically creating a curve of temperature versus focus point, then you'd be able to automatically adjust the focus throughout the night without having to ever do autofocus. That can be really neat. Of course, this is something you can do with the EAF as well, but you need to purchase the temperature probe separately. As far as I know, please let me know if that's the case in the comments. Now, if you are using the ZW-ASI Air for your imaging needs rather than a PC-based solution like I have with N.I.N.A, then this is not for you. It is not going to work, obviously, with the ZW-ASI Air, because the ZW-ASI Air is only compatible, as far as I know, with the ZW-EAF focuser. So that should help with the choice. In terms of the mounting, as I was mentioning earlier, there seems to be no problem. I think the solution they put in place is smart, and it's probably going to be compatible with a very large number of telescopes. And maybe for some it will be less of a headache than what the EF can be if you're using it with a telescope that is, not out there a lot yet. Would I go out of my way to replace my EAF that is set up on my Newtonian telescope with this? No, my EAF on there is working perfectly fine, so I don't see, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation. But to be honest, if I were buying a new focuser from scratch, um, I think I would consider this one because it's tiny, it's light, it doesn't require 12-volt input, but it supports it if you ever need it for whatever reason. And the high precision version allows you to manually change the focus point. That is very nice. But also, the blue of the autofocuser goes not too badly with the light blue of the camera, because I'm using Toptech slash camera Rising Cam cameras, so the colors they're kind of like in the same theme, so that works out well for me. Honestly, but overall, I'm really impressed with what is, I believe, QHY's first foray into the autofocuser domain. This seems well thought out. I was able to just mount it without any issues. I was able to use it without any issues. and I could reproduce the same focus curve over and over again. I also tried on other areas of the sky with the focuser dangling almost completely down, with pointing towards the zenith, and there was no issue. The focus curve was perfect. Everything was working fine. So definitely a strong contender if you're looking for an autofocuser from a reputable brand. So it's absolutely available, and it is in the same price range as the ultra budget ZW-AEF. I am extremely happy to see other budget focusers being available. Competition is always good in the hobby. So always happy to see such new offerings. Anyway, please let me know what your thoughts are below down in the comments. If you found this video useful and the information that I provided about this focuser useful, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel, in which case, welcome. You can also click that bell icon if you want to be reminded of any other video that I publish. And I really want to thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for subscribing, for being a viewer, for being a Patreon supporter, for being a channel member. Every bit helps out and helps me keep going with this channel. So thank you so much. But more important than all of that, don't forget whenever you can to look up at the stars. And I'll see you next time.